Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Patricia Kong. I am from Scrum.org, and I have the pleasure today to be with three wonderful people who think a lot and work a lot in the fields of coaching and are the appropriate people, I think, to have today to talk to us about when this notion of ask the team is not appropriate. So today we're going to talk a lot about psychological safety. We'll talk about this notion of facilitation and coaching to help teams have better interactions. As always, for these webinars, your microphones will be muted throughout. The session is being recorded, so my colleague will have them up for you with the slides so that you can revisit them. Today, I'm hoping for us to really have a conversation with Jess, Ravi, and Andy. So please ask your questions and put them in the Q&A icon in Zoom. And I'll be watching those and delivering your questions to our panelists. So quickly, who's Scrum.org? Scrum.org is us. We're focused in training, education, and community with the thought leadership, I suppose, of where Scrum and Agile fits in the world today and tomorrow. We are founded by the co-creator of Scrum, Ken Schwaber, this little gentleman on the slide right here. And we really focus on community, and that's what I love about these panelists, is that we can bring different aspects from the world and different experiences together. So let's get right into this. And I'm going to ask Andy if you can introduce yourself quickly.
Yeah, hi, I'm Andy Hiles. I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I've been working with Scrum.org for about 5 years. Work with a group out of the Netherlands called the Scrum Facilitators. So sometimes I look very serious, and sometimes I have this weird caricature. Also, the author of Applying Scrum with Kanban, an awesome book about those two aspects of fun. And something really important to me is sometimes I just need to be the little guy walking up a mountain in the mist. And that's kind of relating back to what we are hoping to talk about a bit more today, which is psychological safety and personal space, etc. Finding time for yourself. So that's a little bit about me.
Jess.
So me now, I am an Agile coach as well. I actually currently work with Andy, so working in the same company at the minute. I was asked to provide a bio slide, and I thought, actually, what makes me me? It's probably the fact that I love to go on holiday. So there's a picture of me enjoying beautiful Dorset coast, by the way. Dorset, you probably never have guessed that was there. With a golden retriever, because I like to spend a lot of my time with animals. And similar to Andy, one of the reasons that I put these two pictures in is, oh, sorry, we're playing the music already. So one of the reasons I put these two pictures in was because I wanted to convey that actually what's really important for me is the having fun and kind of being yourself, being authentic, whether that's at home with your friends or whether that's in the workplace, because all of those things really build trust and build authenticity with you and your teams. But that's me.
Thank you. Sorry, my finger was just a little heavy. Ravi.
Yeah, my name is Ravi Verma. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I'm a Scrum.org professional Scrum trainer, also a co-active coach, CPCC from CTI, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So just a little bit of background that I've asked Andy to provide. We're really going to go through 3 different topics, and hopefully that will spawn some questions for you to bring to the panel today for our discussion. And the first one is psychological safety, and then he's just going to have a little message around well-being and neurodiversity. What are your thoughts here, Andy? Because you and I really kind of spawned the idea of this conversation for us to have so publicly, in terms of, hey, we have some assumptions when we approach a team and when we train and when we teach and when we share ideas, but there's some foundations that we assume to exist or we know need to exist, and that's not always what's discussed openly.
Yeah, so I mean, where this came from was actually born from experience, which is working as a Scrum Master with, you know, many teams, but more than a few occasions having difficulty, I guess, as a Scrum Master with people within the team. And that's not because the people were difficult, but the situation around how those individuals were interacting within the team context were difficult, you know, either due to different variations, and we'll kind of talk about what those could be. But the original proposal came from a space where somebody in the team wasn't behaving, you know, like the rest of the team from a culture point of view, and the team were potentially and perhaps not treating that person with respect, or treating that person very nicely, or, you know, into kind of pseudo bullying and those kind of things. And we may have all experienced that, either been on the other end of that, or actually been in a position as a Scrum Master and said, okay, I don't know how I deal with this as a team thing, as a culture thing. Maybe it's conflict, maybe it's just broad disagreement, maybe these people are unhappy within the team. And so we find ourselves in this kind of position where there are many causes and many options why this kind of situation is occurring. And it brought back to this idea, and this is being talked about a lot and a huge amount. And I think, again, we can talk about the pandemic potentially as a kind of an impact of why this exists a little bit more. But this idea of psychological safety, and hopefully we'll explore a little bit more about what potentially psychological safety isn't. But it's, you know, in brief, it's the ability for an individual to share their opinion, share their ideas, and admit mistakes without fear of being degraded or shamed by the rest of the team or the organization or your manager or whoever you work with. So that's kind of one of the aspects. The other aspect is to kind of bring some level of awareness around mental health. Now, we all have mental health. 4 out of 4 people have mental health, and there's obviously a mental health spectrum. Some people may have mental health impairments, i.e. diagnosed mental health conditions, but we are all somewhere, every individual is somewhere on a mental health spectrum, and that's really worth knowing, either just for yourself, but also if you're kind of Scrum Mastering or a leadership position, whatever that looks like to you, that you are aware that everybody will be somewhere on the spectrum.
And that state can change, yeah?
Absolutely. And you will, depending on various factors, and you know, we can spawn into kind of even things you won't think about, but socioeconomic, like how able are you to keep your job or pay your mortgage? And the thing we're all kind of struggling at the moment is what we're going to do with energy and gas prices and those kind of things. Things we don't think about having an impact on how we can perform within work, but obviously do. So that's kind of something to just bear note. And the final one, which is something that's kind of been dear to my heart over the last couple of years, son diagnosed with ADHD. And again, it has a range of symptoms, but also the impact of Agile and Scrum on people with a neurodiverse approach to the world. And again, this is a quote from Better Up, is a perspective that people with cognitive difference are not defective or deficient, right? There's lots of people out there saying, you know, neurodiverse is a superpower. But we need to have that awareness within the team. Maybe that person within the team that you feel is acting different, right, or not speaking up or not contributing, you know, we don't know, right? So we need to build that psychological safety in order to get to kind of like this space, you know, to actually, maybe they don't know they are neurodiverse, right? And there are lots of us out there which may be on this kind of spectrum but haven't sought diagnosis, and that's also quite interesting as well.
Cool. So thanks for making that introduction into the topics. I'm actually going to stop sharing screen so that we can see your lovely faces, and we have some questions coming in. So again, don't feel nervous when you get a chance. Put your question in, and I'll get them to the speaker. So Andy, you shared the definition of psychological safety and what it looks like, and what I'd love to do is just kind of break that down from everyone on the panel. And so when I think of that as a feeling, let's say in the team or in a relationship, when I think of that, for me, it's especially almost in a professional setting where you know there's a lot of things that could happen. I think of it as you're willing to work so hard to make something right and balanced and work well. And when you're safe enough, you know that you can throw it all away for the improvement and the benefit of that team, right? So that's what I think of. Jess, what do you think of, and what does it look like to you to feel like you are in a safe environment,
So
team?
So that definitely, but also maybe on a smaller level, kind of within the relationships that you have with the team, psychological safety to me is that I can ask a question, any question. It might feel like a stupid question, but I don't feel like it's a stupid question. That's really important to me. And I also feel that the people around me are going to answer that with absolutely no judgment, no kind of prejudice whatsoever, and know that when I'm asking, it's from a place of curiosity or just trying to do better. And that is definitely psychological safety for me.
Ravi, what about you?
Yeah, I want to bring in some things I learned from CTI, Coactive Coaching, and ORSC. And one of the things I learned in Coactive Coaching was my body is an information radiator. So my body will send me signals when I am feeling safe and when I am not feeling safe. And sometimes my body will even give me a leading indicator. I noticed this. I was getting on a Zoom call, so I joined a few minutes early. And there are sometimes while I'm waiting for the other person to join, there's a big smile on my face. So that's a leading indicator. I feel safe with this person. I'm looking forward to hanging out with this person. And there are some times when my body is tingling. I can feel a sensation in my shoulders. I'm tightening. It's almost like I'm gearing up for battle. So what I'm learning about myself is my body will tell me when I am and I am not feeling safe. And if I start listening to my body, then I can be aware, and self-awareness leads to self-management. So those are some things that I am noticing as I was preparing for this. Listen to your body. Your body will tell you when you are and you're not feeling safe. And then if there's transparency, then you can inspect and adapt.
So
Yeah.
that's about self. And Andy, I'm actually going to ask you this, and you can tag on your thoughts. Is that's about self, but how does that happen for a team? Because as we were saying, we were thinking about Scrum and all the things that we have to do when we're looking at helping to guide the team as a coach or a Scrum Master. So there's an implication there that the team is self-managing, right? Like that's what the gold star is in Scrum is saying. This is what can happen in the Scrum guide. And so I'm curious, what would we do if we were looking at a team to see if they were feeling this or not?
Yeah, there's an interesting, and when Ravi was talking, there's an interesting article in the New York Times, and maybe we can try and drop that in the links or afterwards, which is it was an article based upon an experience by, I think, a lady called Sasha Thompson. I think it's last year this came out in the New York Times. And there's a line that she uses is, I started shutting up and shutting down. As a way of expressing how, going back to, and I saw the chat pop up, the Spidey senses, how people were reacting, or how she was reacting to the lack of safety within her new job, the exciting brand new workplace that she found herself going into suddenly wasn't giving her that level of safety and able to contribute proficiently. And this is when we start to think about our impact to our mental health and well-being. Flourishing is our kind of expression of ourselves, that feeling that Ravi is. We might be stressed, we might have like a challenge with us, but we're enjoying, and we are free to express, and we are free to enjoy, and contribute, and we are challenged, etc. That's the good space to be. Kind of going back to your point about Scrum, is one of the things I said kind of going into this is Scrum kind of implies psychological safety exists, this idea of self-managing teams. Don't worry, they're cross-functional, they're self-managing, right? And that there's there's an implication from Scrum theory that self-managing means safe.
Yeah. What are some cues? This is a good question. What are just some cues to look for when teams may not feel safe or individuals may not feel safe? And we know that just because of versus introversion versus extroversion, it's not necessarily just the speaking. What else can we look for, especially when we're all these little squares right now in a screen? What do you think, Andy?
Well, I actually was going to pass it to Jess if you're happy to take that.
Yeah, of course. I was when you were talking then, I was going to bring up. I never know how to pronounce his last name. I think it's Lencioni, or it might be Lencioni. I don't know.
Lencioni, yeah.
But thank you, Patrick Lencioni. So he's a person that has developed the 5 dysfunctions of a team model, and it's a really fabulous pyramid. It kind of talks about 5 different dysfunctions that form up, a team that doesn't manage itself properly, that doesn't perform well together, that basically it's not right, it's not there. And that the base kind of that pyramid is the absence of trust, and what that might look like in teams is kind of not being able to talk about your mistakes. So that feeling of hiding your mistakes and being afraid to be vulnerable, and that might come out in Scrum with that sort of lack of transparency, that lack of, in your stand-ups, for instance, oh, everything's fine, no blockers, no impediment, yeah, no, I'm good. It's kind of noticing when that conversation happens again and again and again, and that person is either absolutely on their A game doing everything and definitely needs no help, or there's an opportunity for you as a Scrum team, as a Scrum Master, as anybody in that space to ask the question, is everything okay? Are you sure that you're fine and that you've got no blockers? Is there maybe that sort of, actually, I'm really afraid to be vulnerable, especially in a new team when I don't have that trust, that safety there. Is that thing holding me back or stopping me from actually saying, do you know what, you guys have been using this acronym for 3 weeks and I don't know what it stands for. Can someone tell me what that is? That, small as that can be really simple to help unlock that.
Yeah, thank you. Ravi?
Yeah, so, I was thinking about ask the team, and I'm noticing some questions in the chat panel, like how can we balance psychological safety with accountability? How do you handle if an individual is so against Agile and not open to change? What do I do if I have a quiet team? What do I do if I have a bully on the team? And this is where I love the simplicity of what Ken Schwaber says, which is ask the team. Now, where I ask the team is when I am facilitating a conversation to design the alliance or co-create the working agreement, I might ask the question, what does self-management mean to you? Who would you like to be as a self-managing team? And if I were to steal an idea from Andy, what does flourishing mean to you? How would we know our team is flourishing? And what do we need to flourish? What do we need to self-manage? So should we seed these questions, then people might start saying, well, for me to flourish, I need to feel safe from bullying. I need to know how we are going to handle accountability. Someone might say, I want to know how we might handle people who are dead set against Agile. Now, when the team is sharing their concerns, now the Scrum Master steps back in and they can ask the team, so who would you like us to be? How would you like us to handle these situations? So it is ask the team, but it's almost like you are co-creating the agreement of what we do when turbulence kicks in. So like when you're on a plane, the flight attendant says, look, I don't think it's going to happen, but if there's turbulence, the mask is going to drop off. Take care of your mask first, then take care of your colleague, your passenger, right? I feel there is an analog or an equivalent for a Scrum Master to do that. And then should turbulence occur, as it inevitably will, because we are in a complex adaptive system, now the Scrum Master is noticing, is the team honoring the agreement or the alliance they created? And if they don't, then the Scrum Master might say, hey, time out. I am noticing something, I'm sensing something, and lean into the signals and make it psychologically safe for the team to then lean in. And I feel conflicts and tricky situations could be like explosives or bombs. So we are scared if we go in, it's going to explode. But if the Scrum Master models the behavior and says, we can lean in and something good will emerge, then it may dial down people's anxiety and it may make it safer, so that one day the Scrum Master has left an invisible presence and people are leaning in with curiosity, even without the Scrum Master being there. And that's when the Scrum Master has done their job. Those are some thoughts that came to me.
I'm glad you read all the questions and just answered them all. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, there was a reason I raised my hand, and I think it was mostly around culture. I think this is dipping into the culture and subcultures that can exist within an organization, and certainly a team, and a team can have its own subculture, and certainly around the culture space for people who are quiet, right? What if there's that one person, and this is kind of going back to the original proposition, what if there is that one person that the rest of the team find difficult to work with? What if that one person is not contributing, or being obstinate, being disagreeing all the time, in every planning or every refinement or whatever, review, etc. What if there is that one person? Is it them? Right? Or is the remainder of the team and the culture that's sitting there actually at odds with where that person is? So there's, while we can set boundaries at team space, we're gonna, this is how we can handle conflict, which is totally and perfectly valid, but there's also other things that happen within a team context that you might not spot if you're not looking out for it.
Right.
There's an interesting video by Simon Sinek. I never know how to say his name. It's like Lencioni, which is the video around performance and trust. And he talks about, if you measure performance, right? We have 1,000,001 measures for performance in organizations and teams. How do you measure trust? How do you look at a team and start saying, or even from an individual point of view, I'm safe here. I feel there is enough trust that I can speak my mind without fear of getting in trouble, etc., etc.
Yeah, some of those things. So it's interesting because you were talking about, Ravi, you were talking about from the Scrum Master point of view and the helping, and almost in terms of how do we facilitate those conversations. And Andy, you're touching a little bit on, let's think about how we do that, but also the culture that surrounds it. So one of the things that I just want to, we kind of brushed at this question came in, but there's some questions in here that are really touching on the old struggle between us versus them, right? We are doing Agile, we're for this, and there are some people who are not. And let's bring in a tone also around management and hierarchy. So what do you do when you are in this environment where you can, I want to say it's even more than we can have this conversation. It sounds like some people, they may not be able to have this conversation. Ravi, what for you is a way to approach that, to even test, one, if it's safe, but two, we have, especially us here, we have very strong beliefs about the way of work and what Agile and agility means to us and to the people out there in professionalism. So how do you approach that where you're just saying it might not, the answer might not be build psychological safety? What do you think, Ravi?
Yeah, and I feel it might be counterintuitive, but there is space in the universe for two truths to coexist. And the one truth be, we can be psychologically safe, and we can ensure our values are honored. So I'll give you an example. Let's imagine there's someone whose core personal or professional values, belief systems, mental model is incompatible with Scrum, and they happen to find themselves in a Scrum team. Now, we may have set ourselves up for a recurring and a persistent, intractable conflict because we have created a team which does not have shared values, shared principles, a shared belief system. So I would argue it's a false choice that we must choose one or the other. If in the designed alliance conversation, if we ask this question, how might we handle this situation? Most importantly, here's the question that I ask: should should anyone on the team believe that you are the person who is behaving in a way that is misaligned or inconsistent with team goals or team values, how would you like us to respond in a way that honors you, that makes you feel honored and valued? So this is people being transparent and giving their documentation. Look, if I do that, please engage with me in this way. So I've actually done this in real world companies. And I was blessed to work with a CIO who said, I don't want to get involved in personnel decision. So you're grown-ups, you're adults. I would like you to work out with each other what kind of behavior is acceptable and what kind of behavior is not acceptable, and what is a compassionate and a kind way to figure out, look, you know what, we tried this, doesn't feel like it's a good fit. And I think it's time to part ways. Let's go find another place for this person inside the organization or outside, because life is short. It's just not a good fit. And I've had a real world experience in this company where they did this. This is what Ken Schwaber said in my PSM1 training. Someone asked him, where does management get involved? What if someone needs to be moved out? He said, let the team do it. And I've done it in a real world company where the team spoke to each other. There was one person who was not a good fit. They spoke to each other kindly and compassionately, went to the CIO and said, you know what, we mutually agreed this person is not a good fit. And that person was moved off and they found a different place. So I'm trying to answer as many of your questions as I could, but please pull from me anything else that I missed.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm asking the questions. Jess, in your experience as a coach, I know one of the things that you talked about was the notion of team building. And what are some things that you've seen work and not work in terms of team building, and why do you encourage some sort of fun for team building as the resident cynic who says, don't force fun on me? Like, what do you do in those different circumstances?
All right, half of my job is me saying, let's get to know each other, guys, and people just rolling their eyes straight away. So for me, and for the teams that I've worked with, actually, so I, for background knowledge, was involved right in the start of the Agile transformation for the core Agile Center of Expertise that we've got in our company, and kind of one of the people that helped to foster that sort of environment of sharing and caring and, you know, loveliness within the team. And one of the ways that we did that as a team was encouraging real authenticity. And it's probably going to sound counterintuitive, because I know that lots of people are struggling with building that authenticity when they're working from home, but actually that sort of weird, nosy, oh God, I can see what the background of their house looks like, or, oh, there's their child or their cat that suddenly bursts into the room, and I now know about this strange little thing about them that I wouldn't have known had we not done this, or had we not been part of this strange time, that really, really helped to forge that sort of, oh, I know them a little bit better. I know this person that sits behind the laptop and sits behind the calls. So that kind of authenticity, that being yourself. And also Amy Edmondson, who Andy's put in, I think hopefully will be shared after this call. Amy Edmondson does a fantastic talk on psychological safety. It's a TED talk, so it's Googleable if anybody wants to watch it after the call. But she talks about some of the ways that people can build that psychological safety. And one of those is not being afraid to be vulnerable. And that speaks really, really true to me. Kind of being able to be yourself doesn't always just mean being able to, you know, share what your favorite ice cream is, what you like to do for fun. It's also about the things that make you not want to turn up to work that day. It's the things that actually I'm really struggling to deliver, and this is why. You know, that opening that door to that real kind of vulnerable, authentic, true version of yourself is what helps to create that bond, that trust between people.
Let me follow up. What do you, so there's some great techniques. You're talking about bonds, opening up people. A lot of the reality of what we see, I'm sure you've seen this, is there's a questionnaire about when you just have a quiet team. So what are some of the tips that you would have maybe around facilitation, improving some of that space, where especially in the Scrum events, they're focused on purpose, and they're able to open up about their ideas and share those things? How do you engage a team that is just, they're not going to be as vocal as we would like them to be, maybe even in the beginning?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends how much time I'd have with that team. If it's let's say, for argument's sake, just a workshop, and I've maybe met a couple of the people before, and I know they're really introverted and they're maybe not going to find all of the excuses to speak out loud or join in. What I might do is a little get to know you kind of icebreaker, but that doesn't need to be painful. It can just be something as simple as, what did you have for lunch today? And opening up a bit of dialogue between people just to talk about, you know, the things that they enjoy. Lunch is a really great topic. Lots of people talking about what food they're enjoying. It kind of brings up like a motive, happiness, generally speaking, for most people. So little things like that, little questions like that. If it's something that I've got a long time with the team and I'm really helping them to understand each other, understand their bonds, understand their similarities and differences, I actually really love to do things like DISC, or like psychological personality tests and things like that. Not because that then gives them a free for all, like, oh, I'm you know, an introvert by this, and that's all I'll ever be. It's actually just a good way to start opening the conversation with people. Look, my personality profile is more towards someone that is an observer than right in the middle of the conversation, but actually this is how I tend to communicate with people. This is how I like to give or receive feedback. These are the things to watch out for. If you think I'm being really quiet, these are the things that I like to talk about if you want to build a relationship with me. So having that open dialogue, starting to use things like personality tests, or just generally getting to know people on that level, I think is really, really helpful, especially for that long term.
Thank you. 1 second, Andy, I want to make sure that people know that on Scrum.org, we have some, because the question around facilitation, how do you engage there, on the Scrum.org.com facilitation, there are some videos and just small snippets that you can see to engage and use some of these techniques, and also silent writing or anything like that to kind of level the playing field. Andy, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, well, and something we haven't touched upon, because I think we've been implying that everyone likes each other. And this is the thing. I think one of the key points Amy Edmondson makes around psychological safety is it's not being, it doesn't mean you have to be nice, right? And it's not about just creating this lovely, lovely, happy everybody cuddles, because that then builds more space for people who are feeling uncomfortable with the people they're working with, and they feel this idea that it's called safety builds a kind of a wrap around it and just kind of says, oh, well, I have to be nice. And it's not about that. It's being able to provide that critical feedback when we need it. You know, you're in a sprint review, or you're just building some work with people, and it's just making note that you are providing feedback about the thing, you know, the thing you're building together. One of the studies that's noted is Disney Pixar, and actually this is a cool thing. If anybody's got Disney Plus, you can go and watch how they made Buzz Lightyear, how they made the film, and you'll get an insight actually into Disney Pixar have what they call, I think it's the brain trust, which is when they go and review the kind of the building of the movies and kind of some of the scenes they're building, they have this space where they go into, and it's a physical space to go and review things. When they enter that room, there are lots of rules about what happens in that room, but it's about being critical about the product, not the person building the product. So you don't necessarily have to be nice. It's just there's an environment there that we can provide feedback, and it's safe to do so. You know, I don't
That's
necessarily
about creating, delivering value, right? To say, I disagree, or we have these different ideas, and that's okay.
Because if everyone gets along, we don't learn.
Jess, did you have something to add? And then I have a lovely question for Mr. Verma.
I did. It was just, Andy's totally right, that kind of the importance of healthy conflict, the importance of knowing and being able to differentiate between a personal slight and actually this is some feedback about the work. That's really important, to be able to kind of remove yourself from, you know, what could potentially be construed as a personal sort of insult. Actually, is it about you as a person if they don't like your copywriting? Is it about you, or is it just about that particular piece of copywriting with that particular image, for instance? So kind of taking yourself back and saying, am I telling myself a story? Am I selling myself something, or am I actually seeing these facts? I think that's a really important step to take as well, for sure.
That's helpful. There's definitely different ways on how to deliver feedback and watching for that too, if the environment is safe or not. My coaches definitely taught me in my relationships to use I statements or to talk about those things rather than come at it you. So Ravi, I know it looks like you have something to add. I'd like to also pitch this question to you because it's a conversation that we've had before. So this person is saying, hey, I'm really great at, I believe I'm great at advocating for psychological safety for my teammates. What does it mean for myself? How do I become better at being an advocate for myself? And through that, the example that you talked about. So, you know, we're great at helping other people, but what does that mean when it comes to us? How do we do that? What are some thoughts and suggestions you have there?
Yeah, and I like that one of the comments was, you know, from Mark was one of the ways to model or enable psychological safety is by being vulnerable. So one way that I make myself vulnerable is by telling people, here are some situations where I feel unsafe. And here are some situations, here's something I need from you so that I can feel safe. So a Scrum Master can be like a caregiver and may be called to that role because they're empathetic and they hear the calling to take care of other people and nurture other people. And caregivers can sometimes neglect their own well-being. So first, I think as a Scrum Master, I must reframe taking care of myself, not as an act of selfishness, rather as part of my act of service. Because if my cup is empty, I cannot fill anybody else's cup. So if there's a Scrum Master who is struggling to figure out how might I take care of myself, this reframing might make it okay, because maybe there's a critic or a saboteur inside your mind who's saying, wait, you are being selfish. How dare you take care of yourself? Your team needs you. And that's a struggle that I've had to navigate, right? So reframing taking care of myself as not something that's bad, but rather it's consistent with my life purpose of taking care of my team. Second is being vulnerable and disclosing upfront, being transparent. Here are some situations which make me feel unsafe. Here are some situations where make me feel safe. And I think the third thing is I learned from CTI, there's an acronym called AWGO, articulate what's going on. So if I'm listening to my body and my information radiator and my arms start tingling, or I don't know what part of the body this is, right? And then if I just articulate in the moment, guys, I'm sensing something, I'm feeling uncomfortable right now. I'm feeling unsafe right now. I'm being vulnerable. I'm trying to practice self-care, self-awareness and self-care. And perhaps I'm also making it psychologically safe for other people to say, hey, wait a minute, the Scrum Master seems to be comfortable disclosing when they are not safe and asking for help. Maybe that's a legal move. Maybe I can also try that. So these are some techniques that I'm trying to practice. It's not easy in terms of self-care and also modeling vulnerability and indirectly trying to make it safe for other people and showing them how they might also request for their unmet needs.
Thank you. And I see you want to chime in, and I'm gonna pitch this too, because I want us to delve into this notion of mental health. And so with some of the work that I've done around the future of work, and we're from the pandemic, and there are many more things that happened than just the pandemic in the past 3 years, and everything's in our faces. And so one of the things that organizations, agile or not, should be thinking about is how do they deal with the notion of mental health, and where is that boundary for a company and the individuals and what they believe in and how they feel. So what would be some of your thoughts and advice for someone who's again in that culture that doesn't really know, is not really trying to embrace humans, and they're moving from this notion of people are resources to people are people, and they provide a lot of they're there to build the value for our companies. How do you deal with that culture? And we want to make sure that the the team is good and feels healthy, because there's a boundary on that too, from a business perspective, but also just, you know, other different sources. How do you dance in that rhythm?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in that one statement, but and the reason I was chiming in was because I think where Ravi was dipping in, it was in that kind of well-being space, kind of taking care of self and encouraging people within the team to take care of self is super important. And I think there's some interesting research around the impact of the pandemic, certainly on when I showed the kind of the mental health spectrum model earlier, which is actually less people shifting towards that flourishing, and actually kind of like shifting less towards kind of slightly ill health, either due to pressures or maybe working at home isn't right for them. We need that level of social interaction. I mean, there's some great, so again, hopefully in the stuff that will come out, there's some great couple of websites I put in there. One is What Works Wellbeing, and I forget the other one I've put in there. I'll have to go and look it up. Strategies for well-being and mental health within organizations is incredibly complex. Where you go and target, what you go and look after, what you're trying to improve, and this is primarily driven around the data and the experience that we're seeing. So at a Scrum Master level, you will be seeing behaviors due to either the kind of the cultural impact of the team or the people in the team. And then kind of at the wider level, how is the rest of the organization acting or reacting to certain pressures, certain stresses that are coming through? You know, typically we see we must have this deadline and all that kind of stuff. I kind of want to play it back to the origin of the question, which was, what if I find myself, you know, if I was working in a place that didn't value humans? I mean, you know, the obvious one is get out and find somewhere, you know, but if you're in that kind of ability to start looking at how you influence that, typically as a Scrum Master, if I've been at like a team coach level, I will start to try and kind of in parroting what kind of Ravi was saying, or building what Ravi was saying, which is, you know, I start at the team level and try and make the people around me feel better, because that's my sphere of influence, right? So what can we measure at a team level? What can we measure, either engagement or happiness, or are people taking breaks? Are people going to the gym? Are they actually taking time for themselves? There are probably some things we can measure there. Then when you look at the kind of like the wider group strategies and the wider organizational strategies, then that becomes a little bit more complex. And there are, again, lots of resources out there to kind of go and help organizations design interventions for those. It's kind of, I'm doing a piece around mindfulness interventions at the moment and cognitive behavioral therapy, which is kind of very interesting. But again, it's kind of past this webinar space. I think the thing that the thing that's kind of ticking in the back of my brain is Scrum Masters are not psychologists, and Scrum has, I'm kind of going to go back to that kind of what Scrum is implying from a kind of a looking after self point of view. We kind of imply the Scrum Master should be checking in on everybody's mental health and well-being. Now, I don't know whether that's a true or false statement. And I think that's an interesting topic to explore, because if the Scrum Master doesn't or isn't, and people are not aware themselves, then who should?
Are you asking this back to the team?
Yeah, kind of. I think it's kind of an interesting space to explore.
Go ahead, Ravi. Let's do this for a little bit, and Jess, if you'd like to contribute, because I'd like to get to some other questions too. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing I learned in my coactive training, one of the cornerstones of the coactive model is people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And as part of the certification, this topic comes up quite often. And this was one of my biggest concerns. So I'm a coach, and coaching is not therapy. So one of my concerns was, how might I know when it is appropriate for me to suggest a referral to a psychologist? And because I'm called to serve, one of my biggest fears was my highest obligation to my client is do no harm. And the last thing I want to do is to be coaching where coaching is not appropriate, therapy is appropriate. So there was a big fear that I had. And my coaches from the CTI community, they reassured me, and they suggested that I look at this from the position of, consider looking at the world through the lens, or my client through the lens of, my client is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. My client will know when it is appropriate to go to therapy. And when we do a discovery conversation or we do a designed alliance conversation, this could be one question that we might ask, which is, hey, just a quick overview. This is coaching, this is therapy. They're not the same. There is value in both, and they're situationally appropriate. How do you feel about this? How might we know when coaching is appropriate? How might we know when it's appropriate to invoke, therapy, to do therapy? What do you recommend? And then lean on, articulate what's going on. If it's okay for both coach and coachee to articulate what's going on, hey, I'm sensing something different. Would it be okay if we discuss if this is helping, or is it appropriate to talk about therapy? So again, as Andy said, Scrum Master is not a psychologist, but one thing that I'm leaning on is looking at my coachees from the perspective of the cornerstone of they are NCRW, naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And so far, it seems to be working.
That's the thing in general. My conversations with Ken Traber about Scrum is you're not everything to everyone, but you need to know when to pull the trigger. Same thing as I think when you're looking at as yourself at a leader and how you lead, and then those types of responsibilities. So Jess, I have some interesting questions here, different questions here, and they're around commitment, accountability. So there's something around commitment and goals, and this notion of, how do you get people to commit? And I'm just going to say for that one, when there's commitment associated with goals, it means that team members have to be able to get through conflict in a way that's creative and disagree, like we talk about, so that we can really say, hey, this we really believe in together. So if you have goals that are just continuously put onto a team, it's going to be hard to see that commitment to it. What do you do when you are with a team in terms of that conflict and they're afraid to hold each other accountable because they are afraid or they want to honor psychological safety? And that is a statement I don't know if it's true or false. So I'd love to hear your point of view.
No, that's really fair. And sometimes it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes you're so committed to keeping that sort of atmosphere of, no, everything's fine, everything's okay, we're okay to talk about these things, that actually it becomes a pseudo psychological safety environment. And in fact, you're just hiding things again. You're just kind of brushing them under the carpet. You don't want to address them because you are afraid of rocking the boat. I think that was what you were saying. Is that right?
Well, I think what I'm thinking about, or what the questions are really just about, is how do you, if you're so afraid to cause disruption and your accountability feels almost to the team rather than maybe the work, what do you do to balance that?
I think from my perspective as a coach, again, depending on what kind of squads I'm working with, whether they've got a Scrum Master or not, it's about kind of evaluating what that goal is, maybe just checking back in with the vision, if they've got a vision or a mission statement, just checking back in with that. Does this still feel right with everybody? Does this still feel okay? The team might have OKRs as well, so it might again just be worth just checking back in on those OKRs. Is this actually what we set out to do? Is this actually still something that we think is maybe a stretch, but something that could potentially be achievable? So making sure that you kind of facilitate that conversation with the squad. Andy will know this because I talk about it all the time, but my favorite ceremony, I can't live without them. If I had to give everything else up and just keep one, it would be retrospectives. And that for me is a really great place to check in with things like that. Are we avoiding talking about this commitment because actually we're all a little bit scared to say that we don't think we're going to make it? Or do we need to address the fact that actually is there a lack of commitment amongst us? Is there something else that needs to be talked about here? So like for me, retrospectives are a really great sort of vessel for a conversation like that.
Yeah. The thing that comes back to me is, kicking off this little conversation is about the goals. So thinking about, do we have alignment and understanding and belief that we have autonomy to pursue a goal? And when those factors that are outside of that space or outside of our control aren't happening, that's where that flux seems, and it can affect accountability. So the focus that you're bringing up is really important. Thank you, Andy. I have an interesting question. So for you, and this is about different cultures from different countries, but also I want to add a little bit around this notion of neurodiversity and the diverse part. So I was recently doing a talk with people in Africa, and they were saying, that's great, Patricia, but how do you see this working in Africa? Our culture is like this. So when we talk about vulnerability and we talk about the other side of vulnerability is shame, when we talk about, all these things going on, how do you try to make sense of this when you have a team that is operating, or teams operating in different cultures, and also different neurodiversities? And I would add, what would you also watch for when you're doing that? And even, between an English person and an American person, or an English person and a French person, right?
Yeah, we're back in that culture space, and kind of the overriding kind of takeaway from all of these things is cultures exist. Even when when you can't see them, you don't think you can see them, they exist, right? They are there. You're part of a culture right now. We're probably creating some weird culture here. It's kind of like the way we are behaving. I had an interesting discussion about working with teams in India. Typically, we find working with teams in India from the UK, they're very quiet on the call. Not all, okay, but that's a typical kind of interaction, and it's a cultural thing. Now, do you want to break that culture? Is probably the first question. Is that, or could you leverage that culture, or are there other ways of handling the behaviors that are going on in that culture? Because from one perspective, it could be seen that the people are misbehaving. They're not acting in exactly the way we want them to go and behave. And what's kind of interesting, right? What's driving that thinking from leadership? We're not getting enough feedback. They're not telling us. They're not saying anything. I've had the pleasure of working with lots of people around the world, and different cultures work in different ways. And it's, I guess, from a leadership point of view, from a Scrum Mastery point of view, from just being a good human point of view, not breaking up other people's culture because it suits you is probably the overriding lesson. But understanding it more is far, far better. And I'm reminded of a story with a really good friend of mine who was working with a team, and they wouldn't put the cameras on. This is pre-pandemic. This is a good couple of years pre-pandemic. They were remote, kind of back in the old days. That's what we used to call them. And never put the cameras on. But we knew they had names and bodies and personalities, and he was just struggling. And then one day he just asked them all to send him a photo, and it took a little bit of convincing. Send me a photo of what you look like. And what he did is, around their video board where they were interacting on a daily basis, he put their little pictures in frames. So when the name came up, the team in the UK could actually see physically, virtually, who they were looking at. And it drew both the teams together. They were able to then kind of start, we can see you wear glasses, etc. And they started having very different personal conversations, started drawing those things together. So, bottom line is unless it's a horrifically toxic culture, don't go and break it or challenge it, work with it, right? It's a superpower. Coming on to the kind of the neurodiversity point of view, that's a space which is a lot harder. You don't want to go and diagnose people or pigeonhole, and you kind of, sometimes it's quite easy to say, they must be on the spectrum. It's kind of, maybe not. Without that person being open and honest about where they are, or the struggles they're having, or the challenges they may have, or they may face, without them kind of having the safety to be able to kind of express that, we don't know. But we ought to be aware that these things exist. It's far too easy for teams to suddenly get created, and all of a sudden the quietest person in the team become a sticking point because they're not contributing they're not adding to seemingly, but they're getting on with their work and they're performing and those kind of things, but they're not kind of hitting that kind of culture. They're not kind of joining that culture with us. And this is where it gets really difficult. And this is certainly where I'm very interested at the moment with I've got a 10-year-old son with ADHD, and I'm looking like, how is the future of work going to look for somebody like him? How is his ability to not focus on a daily basis without medication, or for more than 10 seconds, it seems like, trying to get him to do homework, but it's how do we then create teams of people that either are very aware of that behavior within the team. That's kind of really cool. Excuse me. But also, how do we design workplaces and the work? Does Scrum help with ADHD? And I think there were some blogs on Scrum.org recently and a video around ADHD, and I forgive me, I can't remember the name of the person who wrote them. So we know that some people, and again, being a spectrum, we know that some people will gravitate naturally towards structured work, and actually some people might find it very challenging. Some people on the neurodiverse spectrum, or even with disability, might find the idea of having a conversation every day with my peers like super anxiety. If there is somebody with super anxiety, they will not want to contribute, and that's to some degree it's kind of heartbreaking, right? It's kind of, you value them as part of the team. They've been hired because they're incredibly amazing at what they do, but yet they don't feel confident enough. We haven't created an environment that they can feel safe to contribute. So kind of lots to unpack in that whole kind of question.
So many.
But it's a fascinating insight that I really wish teams of people would be just a little bit more aware, rather than just thinking that person's a problem. It's being aware of how they are acting a little bit more, and kind of just opening eyes a little bit more to kind of say, oh, okay, maybe.
And that's kind of, there's another kind of comment in here that points to. So your comment about awareness and bias, and so sometimes people's reactions is about safety, but it's also not. Sometimes it's about, I think, maybe they're just more risk averse. And so when we're trying to have people participate, there's definitely lots of different ways. So we're coming up toward the end of our time box, and there were very many specific questions in here that we'll take a look at it and try to get back to everyone. But I do want to thank you for your time. I have one interesting question here that I thought it'd be cool to close out with. For each of you, what is one thing that you would look to do if you were to try to increase this notion of team and psychological safety? And what is one thing that if you would not do, if you thought that a team was already safe? What is too much, in a sense, right? Because it is about ask the team and self-management. So for a team that's not there, what do you do? And for a team that's already there, what's too much? What don't you do? Let's start with you, Ravi.
I would say reframe conversations, not in terms of a specific position, not in terms of perhaps even the product, but the persona. We all are in this together to make life better for a certain set of human beings. How might this behavior, attitude, approach be consistent or inconsistent in making life better for this human being? I feel it can change the conversation from adversaries across the table to side by side, and looking at it from the perspective of a human being we all love and care about, hopefully. So that's one thing I would say. We're out of time. I'm going to pass.
Just 10 seconds.
Oh God, I would say acknowledge your fallibility, acknowledge you're not perfect, and role model that. That's probably how I'd build that, and kind of creating that authenticity. I'm sorry, I forgot the other question.
That's okay. We'll give it to Andy. What is something, Andy, that you would not do if you had?
Focus on the work above people's health and well-being. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending. This recording will be up, and we'll look forward to seeing you again another time. Scrum on.
Thank you.
Thank you.